The forest was dense, its towering pines cutting the sky like jagged spears. A thick mist curled along the ground, weaving through the underbrush like a specter. It was early morning, the air heavy with the scent of wet earth and pine needles. A faint, whispering breeze stirred the leaves, creating an eerie, almost rhythmic rustling that echoed through the trees. The wolf moved through the forest, its silver-gray coat blending with the fog. It was a young male, lean but muscular, its eyes sharp and focused. The forest was his domain, a place where he had learned to survive and thrive. But something felt different this morning. There was an unease in the air, a tension he couldn't quite place. The usual chorus of birds, squirrels, and distant rustlings was absent. The forest felt still. He padded quietly, careful to keep his movements measured, his senses alert. His ears twitched at every rustle, his nostrils flared to catch every scent. The ground beneath his paws was soft, moist from the morning dew, but the silence that enveloped the forest made it feel unnatural. He felt like a hunter, but more than that, he felt like prey. A sudden movement caught his eye, something larger, darker, just a few trees ahead. His heart quickened, the instincts of his ancestors rising in his chest. The creature he had spotted was massive, its outline distorted by the fog. At first he thought it might be another wolf, but the scent was all wrong. This was something much larger, something dangerous. The wolf took a slow step back, his body tensing, his muscles coiled like a spring. His ears flattened against his head as he sank into the shadows, watching carefully. He was no stranger to predators. He had avoided bears before. But this was different. This was a grizzly, a colossal one, its thick fur matted and dark from the rain that had fallen earlier in the night. The bear was sniffing the ground, moving slowly and deliberately through the underbrush. It didn't seem to have noticed the wolf yet, but that didn't make the wolf feel any safer. He knew the bear's scent lingered in the air, and it was only a matter of time before the bear's keen senses would pick up on him. The wolf remained still, barely daring to breathe. His muscles screamed in protest, but he held his ground. He knew that the bear was a formidable predator, faster than one would think for such a massive animal, and incredibly strong. A confrontation was not something he was prepared for, but the option of retreat was quickly slipping away. The fog thickened, swirling around them like a living thing. The wolf's mind raced. He had to make a choice, stay and wait for the bear to move on, or take the risk and flee. His body screamed at him to run, but he knew that even a small sound, a single wrong move, could tip the balance. For what felt like an eternity, the two animals remained in their respective stillnesses, the only sound the faint rustle of leaves in the wind. Then, as if by instinct, the bear lifted its massive head, its dark eyes scanning the misty landscape. The wolf's heart thudded loudly in his chest. The bear's gaze flicked over the area where the wolf had been, its nostrils flaring. The wolf's instinct screamed at him to bolt, but he forced himself to remain silent. The bear seemed to hesitate for a moment, and then, with a low grunt, it turned and lumbered toward the distant trees. The wolf remained motionless, unsure whether to exhale or hold his breath longer. Just as he thought the danger had passed, a low growl echoed from behind him. His heart skipped. The growl was not the deep, rumbling sound of the bear. It was something far more terrifying. The unmistakable growl of another wolf. He whipped his head around, eyes wide with shock. There, emerging from the fog, was a large, dark wolf. Its fur matted and its eyes wild with hunger. The wolf was alone, its body thin, and it seemed to be stalking the same prey. In that moment, the wolf realized what had been unsettling him all along. The forest wasn't still because of the absence of sound. It was still because the animals were hiding, waiting for the right moment to strike. The other wolf had been trailing him. But the sudden presence of this new threat wasn't the only problem. No, something else was wrong, something far more dangerous. As the dark wolf approached, it didn't move like a typical predator. Its body seemed too tense, its movements jerky, as if it were unnatural. The realization struck the wolf like a bolt of lightning. This wasn't a normal wolf. This was a creature driven by desperation, not instinct. And it was hungry, more desperate than any hunter he had ever encountered. As the dark wolf came closer, the forest seemed to close in around the young male, the trees pressing in on him. It wasn't just the bear anymore. It wasn't just the strange, hostile wolf. It was something deeper, something far older. The forest itself had shifted into a place of menace, a place where only the strongest survived. The growl of the dark wolf echoed through the trees, a sound that felt like a warning. The hunt had begun. The young wolf had been quiet, watching, waiting. But now, with the weight of the forest pressing down on him and the strange wolf drawing closer, his instincts flared. He needed to survive. Without thinking, he bolted. The dark wolf gave chase, its limbs thrashing through the underbrush with a frantic, unnatural pace. The young wolf darted between trees, his heart pounding as the sound of heavy paws followed him through the mist. But as the chase unfolded, the young wolf began to notice something. The forest had changed. The ground beneath him was no longer familiar. The trees, the underbrush, the scent of the air, they were all wrong. He was running in circles, chasing his own tail, unable to escape. Every turn he took led him back to the same clearing, the same dense cluster of trees. And there, standing still as if waiting for him, was the grizzly bear. The wolf froze in his tracks. The bear's eyes glinted with something almost knowing. And that was when he realized this wasn't a hunt anymore. This was a trap. The forest had lured him here to this exact spot where it would make its decision. Would the wolf survive this game of survival, or would he become another part of the forest's twisted tapestry? As the bear slowly lumbered toward him, its steps deliberate and heavy, the young wolf's instincts screamed one final command: run. But it was already too late. The young wolf turned sharply, his legs burning with effort, as he sprinted deeper into the forest, the heavy thud of the grizzly's massive paws echoing behind him. Each stride felt like an eternity, but every instinct told him to keep moving, to push through the pain, to escape the inevitable. The bear was closing in. He could feel its presence like a shadow looming over him. The trees, once familiar and comforting, seemed to shift as he ran. They no longer offered the cover they once did. The mist, which had seemed like an ethereal veil before, now seemed to press against him, wrapping around him, suffocating him with its heavy weight. The sounds of the forest were muted, swallowed up by the growing tension. The growls from the dark wolf, still trailing behind, were distant but unmistakable, a reminder that he wasn't alone in this nightmare. The young wolf's breaths came in sharp, desperate gasps. His muscles were screaming for rest, but he couldn't stop, not now. If he slowed, even for a moment, it would be over. The bear's steps grew louder, more urgent. He could hear the crackling of branches being snapped under its weight. He had to find a way out, some path that would lead him to safety. But the forest was closing in, each turn he made leading to more confusion, more disorientation. Then, as if the forest itself had taken notice of his plight, he stumbled into a clearing, a vast open space that should have felt like freedom, but instead felt like an arena. The young wolf skidded to a halt at the edge, his ears flicking nervously. There was no way out. The clearing was surrounded by thick, impenetrable trees, and the mist hung heavily in the air. The bear appeared at the far side, its massive frame barely visible through the fog. It had stopped, watching the wolf intently, as if studying him, calculating his every move. The young wolf's heart thundered in his chest, his every sense focused on the predator. The air was thick with the smell of earth and blood, and for the first time, the wolf felt the weight of his vulnerability. From the other side of the clearing came the sound of the dark wolf's labored breathing. It was closer now, but the young wolf could hear that something had changed in its approach. No longer was it moving with the raw hunger of a predator. Now it was erratic, almost desperate. It wasn't following the wolf, it was chasing something else. The ground beneath the young wolf's paws trembled. The bear stepped forward, its enormous claws scraping against the earth, sending vibrations through the soil. The wolf was trapped, surrounded by the two greatest predators of the forest. But as he watched the bear's movements, something shifted inside him. A realization, a final understanding of the forest's design. The forest had not lured him here to punish him. It had lured him to make him see. To understand that survival in the wild was not about running. It was not about outlasting the predators that chased you. It was about choosing to confront what hunted you, to face the danger and make a choice that would define your place in the ecosystem. The young wolf's body stilled, his breathing evening out. He wasn't going to run anymore. The mist swirled around him, and for the first time he felt connected to it, as if he were a part of something greater. The bear was close now, its massive body casting a shadow over the clearing. The dark wolf had stopped, watching from the opposite side. And then it happened. Something unexpected. The bear, seemingly sensing the change in the atmosphere, paused. It stared at the wolf, not with the predatory hunger of a hunter, but with the quiet understanding of an ancient creature who had lived through countless battles. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The dark wolf, still at the edge of the clearing, gave a low growl, its eyes flashing in the dim light. But instead of rushing toward the young wolf, it retreated. It wasn't running. No, it was simply backing away. The young wolf, still standing motionless, watched as the dark wolf disappeared into the mist, and as the bear, too, turned away and disappeared into the shadows, the forest seemed to exhale. The tension lifted, the oppressive stillness broken by the sound of birds beginning to stir in the treetops. The forest was returning to normal, but the young wolf remained in the clearing, his body trembling with the aftershock of what had just occurred. The forest had not been trying to trap him, it had been testing him, pushing him to face the ultimate truth of the wild. Survival was not a matter of strength or speed, it was a matter of balance, of understanding the rhythm of the world around you and knowing when to stand firm and when to retreat. The young wolf didn't know what had happened to the dark wolf. He didn't know if it would return or if it had simply faded into the mist, an echo of something darker, something lost. But he did know one thing. He had survived. And in that survival there was a quiet understanding, a sense of clarity that he had never known before. The forest was no longer a place of danger, it was a place of life, and in the heart of that life he had earned his place. The young wolf lifted his head, his eyes scanning the forest one last time, and then, without a sound, he turned and disappeared into the shadows, the mist swallowing him whole. And the forest once again fell silent. The young wolf moved with a newfound purpose, his steps deliberate and steady as he navigated through the dense trees. The eerie silence of the clearing still lingered in his mind, a haunting reminder of the intensity that had just passed. But now the world around him felt different. The forest, once an unknown realm of threats and challenges, now seemed like a place of understanding, a place that was neither merciless nor kind, but simply alive, with its own pulse and rhythm. As he walked deeper into the forest, the mist began to thin, the air growing clearer, the scent of pine and earth stronger. He could hear the faint rustling of small animals in the underbrush, the distant call of birds echoing through the trees. The world was waking up again, as if it too had been holding its breath during the standoff in the clearing. The young wolf paused, his ears flicking as a new sound reached him. Footsteps. Not the heavy, deliberate thud of the bear, nor the erratic, skittering movements of the dark wolf, but the light, steady steps of another. His senses heightened, every nerve on alert. He turned toward the sound, his eyes scanning the trees, but saw nothing at first. The forest had a way of hiding things, of cloaking them in shadows and silence. The footsteps grew louder, closer, and then, just as suddenly, they stopped. The wolf's breath caught in his throat. He wasn't alone. But before he could react, a figure stepped from the underbrush. A slender fox, its fur a striking mix of orange and white, its eyes sharp and alert. It wasn't large, but it was quick, agile, and cunning. The fox didn't make a sound, its gaze meeting the young wolf's with a calculated calm. The wolf tensed, but he didn't move. He had learned, in that moment of confrontation with the bear, that reacting out of fear or aggression would lead nowhere. Instead, he waited, observing the fox. The two creatures stood in a silent standoff, neither daring to make the first move. The fox was small compared to the wolf, but its sharp eyes told the story of someone who had learned to survive through wit, not just strength. After what felt like an eternity, the fox turned away and trotted a few paces deeper into the woods, stopping just out of the wolf's sight. The young wolf stood still, unsure of the fox's intentions. Was it an ally? A potential threat? Or had the fox, too, been watching, silently observing this young creature who had faced down the greatest predators in the forest? There was no way to know for sure, but the wolf understood one thing: he was being watched. In the days that followed, the young wolf found himself more aware of the subtle signs in the forest. He no longer relied solely on his instincts to guide him. He was listening more closely to the sounds of the trees, the whisper of the wind, the quiet movements of the creatures that shared the land with him. It wasn't just about running or hiding. It was about understanding the language of the forest, the unspoken rules of survival. And yet, there was something gnawing at him, something in the back of his mind that he couldn't shake. The fox's presence had unsettled him, but it wasn't fear that lingered. It was something else. The fox had been observing him, that much was clear, but why? Had it been curious about his survival, his place in the ecosystem, or was it simply watching because it too was trying to understand the balance of the forest? The wolf's thoughts were interrupted one evening as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land. He was moving through the forest when he caught sight of something out of the corner of his eye, a flash of orange in the distance. It was the fox. This time it wasn't just standing still, watching from the shadows. It was moving with purpose, weaving in and out of the trees, its movements deliberate. And then the wolf saw it, something larger moving just beyond the fox. His heart skipped a beat. It was the dark wolf. The dark wolf, the one he had sensed earlier, the one who had been trailing him in the clearing, was now walking alongside the fox. The two creatures moved in tandem, as if they were working together, sharing a purpose. The young wolf's body tensed. He knew better than to approach them. His instincts told him to stay hidden, to observe from the shadows. But the curiosity that had been building inside him, the need to understand, drove him forward. He watched as the dark wolf and the fox moved deeper into the forest, navigating the terrain with ease. The young wolf followed at a distance, keeping to the shadows. As they passed a dense thicket, he saw something that stopped him in his tracks, a clearing up ahead. one he recognized. It was the same one where he had confronted the grizzly bear. But now the clearing was empty. The bear was gone. The dark wolf and the fox reached the clearing, pausing at the edge. The young wolf remained hidden, his heart racing. He had to know what was happening. Then, just as he thought he had witnessed everything, the ground began to tremble. It wasn't the bear this time, nor any other animal. No, this was something different, something more powerful. The wolf's instincts screamed at him to move, but it was too late. The earth gave way beneath his paws. The ground cracked open, and from beneath it, something massive rose. A creature larger than the bear, its body covered in a rough, dark hide, its eyes glowing with an unnatural intensity. It was a creature of the deep forest, one that had been dormant for centuries, waiting for the right moment to emerge.